All right, here it is. Another animation tutorial is finally here. And this time it's shared transitions. That's coming right up. Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Alex and I'm here to take your NativeScript skills to the next level and be native everywhere in the globe. Today we've got an animation tutorial and it's one that's so many times been requested here on this channel and I finally got around to doing it. It's shared transitions in NativeScript with one extra kick. By the way, you know what shared transitions are, right? It's where you have a list of items and you tap on one item and that photo animates to another page. If you have an iOS device and you've used the News app had it in there. I'm sure some Android apps also have it. But we're doing this in a cross-platform way for iOS and for Android. And the one extra thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna use native navigation. So that's right, we're not just animating the photo from one view to another, we're actually using native navigation. So you can split up your pages in a master detail type of fashion and still use your native navigation like you get with NativeScript. But we're gonna add that shared transition, which is gonna animate our image from the first page, which is the master page, to the details page. Now we are doing this in NativeScript Core, but before all of you start complaining and saying, why aren't you doing this in Angular? Or why aren't you doing this in Vue? Well, we're gonna use the nested frame technique, which I showed before on this channel. So check that video out. And also the custom events technique, which I also showed how to do in a previous video. And I showed you how to do that in NativeScript Core and NativeScript Vue. So check those out and then you'll know how to do this one as well. Because in this video, we're building on top of that knowledge and adding an extra step where the animation takes place. If you're using NativeScript with Angular, you don't even need to bother with nested frames. You already have that built in for you by the very structure of NativeScript Angular. Your page router outlet is a frame with a page inside of it. So you can just take that page router outlet and put it in another layout, like a grid layout, and then you automatically have a nested frame layout. Let me know if you want to see a tutorial about that down below in the comments. By the way, if you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it so I can keep giving you these NativeScript tips, tricks, and tutorials. And click the little bell button so you don't miss any of them. You ready? Let's do this. All right, here's just a preview of what we're making. I'm gonna tap on one of these images and it's gonna navigate me to the details page. Notice this is native navigation. So this is actually iOS navigation and we're going to the details page. This is not on the same page where that animation takes place. If I tap on this image, you'll see that image grow into the next page and be on the details page. All right, and this is just a few images we have. It could be a list. We're just gonna use a stack layout and stack all these images on top of one another. All right, let's begin. I've just created a brand new application from the Hello World TypeScript template. And this is what it looks like. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with this, especially if you've been watching lots of videos on my channel. I usually like to start things off with where you're going to be starting things off if you're following along. All right, so this gives us a main page. We're not going to use the main page. I'm going to go to the app folder here and create two folders here. They're going to contain our pages. One is going to be the home folder and another one's going to be in the detail folder, details. All right, so in the home folder, I'm going to create the home page, which is going to be home-page.xml. And then we're also going to have a code behind file. So that's home-page.ts. Let's also create a pair of those for the details page, details.xml and details.ts. Now you can add -page on it, and that was a requirement before, but now NativeScript doesn't require that. So that's why I'm using just details here, just for variety. Let's head over to the app root here, which is a view that basically points a frame to our main page. Now I'm gonna actually use a technique that I've showed you before here for multiple frames. We're gonna use nested frames here to handle this kind of animation. And if you haven't seen that tutorial, I highly recommend you take a look at that. I'll link to it down below in the description. So instead of pointing our root frame to main page, I'm actually gonna point it to another page I'm gonna create called the root page. So I'm gonna copy this name here and I'm going to create another page here called rootpage.xml. It's just going to be an XML file, but we're also going to have some code behind here. So I'm going to do that later. First, I'm just going to put it here so we don't forget it, rootpage.ts. Now in the XML, we're going to have a page here And inside of that, we're going to have a frame. So there's going to be a nested frame type of situation where we have this app root that has a frame that's pointing to the page called root page. And inside of that page, we have another frame that's going to be pointing to yet another page. So we need a default page property here, and we're going to point to home page. And I'll just give my frame here a width of 100% and a height of 100% as well. Let's go ahead and close out that frame element. Let's head over to homepage and just add a little bit of content here just so that we see something. I'm going to create a page element here and close it out. And let's just give it an action bar with the title of people, because we're going to have people's faces here. Let's close out the action bar. Okay, so our app reboots, and there we go. We have now a page, which is the home page. That's the page that we see here, but it's nested inside another frame, which is nested inside another page, which is nested inside another frame. So that's our hierarchy. We have an action bar here called people. Let's get some people in here. I'm actually going to just paste this in because it's going to be a lot of typing. So I'm going to have a scroll view here pointing to pictures of people. These are just basically avatars that are coming in from a service online. You can go to the service placem.at and then people, and then it'll get you a random photo of people. So here we are. We have now a scroll view of just photos of people. Pretty simple. And notice this, I'm using stretch value of aspect fill, which means that if I define a height and a width here of 200, for example, it's going to fill in that space, but it's going to keep the aspect ratio of the image the same, so the image doesn't appear stretched. And I've also added this tap handler called image tap, which is not yet implemented in the code behind. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to the code behind for the home page, and I'm going to export a function called image tap. And this is going to get some args passed in, and that's of type event data. It's going to get auto imported right there. Now args.object in our case is going to be the image itself that we tapped on. So I need to go ahead and just cast that as an image and save that off as a constant called image. Unfortunately, auto import doesn't work here for some reason, so I'm going to have to manually import image. And that's coming from TNS core modules UI image. Now image, that's the thing we tapped on. It lives on a page. So we're going to get a hold of that page as a reference and just save it off right here. We're going to need that. So I want to navigate the closest frame to me, and I want to go to the details page. So I'm going to use page.frame, which is the nearest frame to my image that I tapped on. Not the top frame of the UI stack, but the nearest frame to me. By the way, if you want to be able to differentiate between those frames and you want to know the difference, check out my videos here that I've posted very recently. It was a week before this video, I believe, about finding the right frame. And that's the difference between the UI frame at the top and the topmost frame that you're navigating. Okay, so we're going to use this frame to navigate. And I'm going to call the navigate function here and pass in a navigation entry object. So we need to specify the module that we want to navigate to. In our case, we want to navigate to the details page. So it's going to be details/details. And then I want to pass in context, which is an object that you can just pass from page to page as you're navigating between pages. And I want to pass in the image source, and that's going to be image.src. We may need that in the future. It depends what technique. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of doing this, but we're going to end up not using this context. So if you want to just skip this part, you can, but I'll show you another option where you can use the context here. All right. And also I want to set the transition up here, so it's about the same as it is on Android. Now on iOS, by default, if you go from page to page, the screen is going to shift from the right side of the screen to the left if you're navigating. But on Android, that's not the case. On Android, it's a fade transition by default. So I want to just have them be the same so that they look the same. And I think that this effect actually works better when they're the same, when it's a fade navigation instead of a slide. So if it's iOS, then I want to use fade. But if it's on Android, we're just going to use the default transition. Okay. All right. So we've set up the home page. Now let's go to the details page, and we need something here as well. So I'm going to have a page element. And let's also define an action bar with a title of details. let's have a grid layout, and we're going to have an image at the top that's going to be 200 in height, and the second row is going to have some details about this item, like some text, maybe their name. If it's a news article, it might have the news article title, whatever you want. I have 2 rows here as an example, but the key thing is that the top row is going to have our image, and that's set to 200 because I know that our image is 200 pixels tall, and I want to know that ending value. So that's why I'm limiting my first row to 200 here. All right, so I'm going to put that image right here, and I'm going to give it an ID of image detail. And I'm also going to give it the same stretch attribute value of aspect fill. And this time I'm going to set the height of 200, but I'm not going to set the width. And the reason for that is on the details page, I want the image to take up the full width of the available page. So it's going to preserve the aspect ratio of the actual image, but it's going to be wider than the original image that's a square on the home page. So you'll see how that works. Let's also set a vertical alignment property here, because we want that image to be at the top. And if you're inside a grid, you want to set that vertical alignment to push that element to the top of the grid. And then we're also going to have a scroll view here. This is going to go in row 1, so it's going to take up the rest of the page, and it's going to be scrollable content. Now, what do we put in here? Really doesn't matter, not for our purposes here anyway, but I'm just going to put in a stack layout with 2 labels here. So I'm going to copy that and paste that in right here. You'll see that I have a stack layout with a long piece of text, lorem ipsum, and then I have a larger piece of text right here that's going to be our details page title. Okay, let's test this out. I'm going to go over to the simulator and I'm going to tap on one of these people, and you'll see that we get navigated to the details page, and this is native navigation taking place right here. And the details, I can scroll. There is no image at the top, but we do have the space allocated for that image. And if I tap on any one of these, you'll get to the same details page. We finished the setup. The next part is actually making that image show up on the details page. And we're going to use this with the technique that I showed before about custom events in your NativeScript applications. If you haven't seen that video, check that out. I'll link to it down below. You're going to use custom events passed to the root frame, and we're going to let the details page know what image was selected. So let's go back to our home page right here. And we want to send a message to the root frame because we're going to communicate through the root frame. So how do we get a hold of the root frame? This is not going to be this frame right here, the frame that we're using to navigate, but the top UI frame. Well, there's a couple ways of doing this. And one way is the way I showed you in previous video, where you can just get a hold of the top UI frame. But there's another way, and I have yet another video that I created of getting a class name, getting a view by a class name. And the top UI frame in NativeScript is going to have a class name that's well known, and it's called NSRoot. So that's going to be the class name that we're looking for. This is going to be applied to the topmost frame, even though it's not something we have to define. It's something that the NativeScript framework will do for us. So we want to get the element by class name of NSRoot. How do we get that element? Well, I have a special utility that I've created that you can use as well. So I'm just going to create a utils.ts file right here in the root of my app, and I'm going to paste that in. Let's take a quick look at that. All right, the function I want to call is this one right here, get elements by class name, and this will actually get the top UI frame. So I've included the function that gets the top UI frame right here as well. We could use this as well, but I wanted to use a different technique here. So we're getting the elements by class name. And then this basically digs in and iterates over a hierarchy of elements to get us those views that we need by the class name. Again, check out that video if you haven't seen it yet, if you are curious about how to do that. So we're going to call that function get elements by class name, and I'm going to pass in this NSRoot right here. Get elements will return to us all the elements of that class name, but we know there's only one, so we want the first one, so it's going to be an array. I'm going to access the first element, and I'm going to cast this as a frame. All right, I probably need to save this file, utils.ts, in order for VS Code to offer me an import, and it still doesn't work, so I'm going to refresh or reload the window. I've been having to do this a lot lately, and I don't know why VS Code is just not catching up. Okay, there we go. Get elements by class name. So we have the root frame now, and we want to notify it. So root frame, we're going to send a message to it, and the message is going to contain an object. We want to give it an event name, and this is going to be our own custom event. So I'm going to call it whatever I want. In your own applications, I suggest you prefix this with your own application prefix, the one that you commonly use, like a namespace. For example, in the courses on nativescripting.com, in the pro courses, I use RPS as a demo. So I'm going to say RPS transitions, for example. But here, because it's a demo, I'm just going to have a simple transition event name. And also, you probably don't want to keep it here because it's a magic string and it's might get mistyped in another spot. So for demo purposes, this is fine, keeping the string in here. And then we want to pass in an object here, and the object is going to be that image right here. Now the homepage is going to go ahead and notify the root frame, but the root frame is not listening. So let's go back to the root frame, and that's over here, app root. This is the root frame that's going to have that NS root class. But how am I going to receive that message here in the root frame? Well, I could add a code behind file here in approot.xml and have a loaded event here and listen for messages there. But I also have this root page that already has a code behind file, so I can actually access it from there. How do I do that? Well, I can go to root page here and add an event to the page, the loaded event. We're going to listen for the loaded event, and I'm going to call on page loaded when that gets called. Let's go ahead and add this event handler and the code behind. I'm going to export a function called on page loaded. This is going to receive some args, type as event data again. And here our args.object is actually going to be a page. So I'm going to cast it as such and save that off. Now, this is where we can hook up an event listener for our root frame. So this page right here is our root page, and that we know that its frame is going to be the very top root frame of the UI, and that's not going to change. So page.frame, and we can say on, which is going to hook up a custom event, on transition, that's the event name. So whenever we notify that with the event name transition, it's going to fire off this function right here that we're about to define, arg event data, and then the body of the function is going to go here. When we fire off this transition, when we notify, we also send in an object. So it's going to be arg.object, and we sent in an image. So I'm going to cast that object as an image. Oh, look at that. This time it imported just fine. I don't know why sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So let's save that off as old image. And I'm just going to say console log for now. Let's take a look at old image.source. So let's see if this all works. I'm going to open up the console here. It looks like my app crashed. It happens sometimes when I'm adding pages and code behind files and things that Webpack sometimes might not pick up and get confused about. So sometimes periodically, instead of using hot module reload, I actually restart the application altogether. Okay, there is our list of images. I'm going to tap on one of these. We go to the details page, but we also get this notification here. Check it out. So this is actually coming from the root frame, or actually it's the root page, but that's where we defined our custom event handler. And there is that image that we tapped on, random equals 2. If we tap on another one here, let's say this one, it's going to be random equals 3. So that's working. Our custom event is working. We're notifying the root frame. Good. Now what about that image? How do we let the details page know what that image is? Well, we're going to let the root frame know when the details page has been navigated to, and then have the root frame provide that image to the details page. So let's go back to the details page, and right up here where the page is defined, I'm going to have a navigated to event. I'm going to call the handler on navigated to, and in the code behind, let's go ahead and define that. So I'm going to export a function called on navigated to. This is going to have some args, but this time it's not event data, it's more specific. We can use the navigated data type here. And args.object is actually going to be the same. We can just cast that as a page here and save that off as a page. And the reason we want that is because we want to get a hold of that view ID, and that's the image ID. So we're going to call get view by ID on the page and pass in the ID of the image, and that's this right here. So on the details page, we gave this image an ID, img detail. Let's go ahead and pass it in here so we can get a hold of that image right there. So const image page get view by ID image detail. And I want to send that image to the root frame again. So we're going to have another custom event here saying that we're done navigating. Now we just need to get a hold of that root frame again. And we've already done this right here in the home page. So I'm going to copy all this right here, including the notification, copy and paste it right here in details. So we're getting a hold of the root frame. I'm going to import that function and the frame class. And then we're going to shoot off another notification to our root frame, but this time it's not going to be the transition event. I'm going to call it something different. I'm going to call this nav done event, and I'm going to pass in our image. You know what? To be a little bit more specific about what image this is, I'm going to say image detail, and I'm going to pass image detail in with that. Okay, let's head back to the root page and define yet another handler here. I'm just going to copy this right here and say page.frame.on nav done, and I'm going to change this to arg detail so we know where this is coming from. It's coming from the detail page, and arg detail.object is actually an image. Oops, I forgot a semicolon here and here. Okay, so this is the image detail. And what we want to do is basically set the source of the image detail to the same source as the image that we originated with. So let's just have a temporary variable here, blah, 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 and it's going to be nothing. And let's just quickly do this. So SDF is going to be old image dot source. We're not going to keep this code. That's why I'm not naming it very well here. And here we're going to have image detail dot source set to SDF, blah, blah, blah. Let's see if this even works. I'm going to tap on this, and there we go. You can see that that works just fine. There is a little bit of a delay, and that's to be expected because we are firing that event a little bit later, but we're not going to see that when we actually do the transition. So that doesn't matter. Also, that image is getting re-downloaded, but if you want to cache it, you can use some other caching strategy, and that's for another video. However, for our purposes, we're not actually going to see that flash because we're going to have another image animating between those two. So that brings me to the next step. The next step is actually getting yet another image to animate between the first image on the home page and the second image on the detail page. And this is where the magic of having nested frame comes in. So in our root page right here, we've defined the frame. This is the frame that we're navigating. And inside this page, around the frame that we're navigating, I'm going to create an absolute layout here. I'm just going to wrap that frame in an absolute layout, just like that. This way I can position the frame in the absolute layout and another image. So this is going to be our image that's going to be animating. I'm going to give this image an ID of over image, so like an overlay, and initially it's not going to have a source. We are going to fill that in later. And the stretch value, I will define that. It's going to be aspect fill, just like the other stretch values we've had. By the way, because this is inside the absolute layout, that's why we need this height 100 and width 100% on this frame. If we didn't have the absolute layout, you don't really need the width and height on that frame. Okay, and there's one more thing we need to do here for this image. Initially, this image is not going to be visible at all, so I'm going to hide it and I'm going to set its visibility. We want to use the visibility property instead of the opacity property because we want it to be completely hidden from view and from touch. If you just set opacity to 0, it's not going to be visible, but it's going to block any kind of touches we do, so we don't want that to happen. So visibility hidden will take care of that. All right, now we have an image on top of our frame. It's called over image. Let's go back to the code behind and get a hold of that. So right over here, I'm going to say page get view by ID, and we called it over img. That's an image, so I'm going to cast this as image, and I'm going to save this off as image overlay. Let's go ahead and delete this temporary thing we were doing with the sources. We don't need that. Now, when the transition starts happening inside this event handler right here, I want to make sure that I force that image overlay and the visibility of that to be hidden. The next thing I want to do is say image overlay, and here we're going to set the source. So the source is going to be old image source. So now we're setting that image overlay source to be the same exact thing as the old image. And I also want to match the height and width. So image overlay dot height, let's set that to old image dot height, and image overlay dot width, let's set that to old image dot width. Let's go ahead and delete this console log here. Now, after we've set all this up, I want to start our animation, but there's a little bit of a timing issue that we need to handle. And we want to do this inside of a set timeout. So I'm going to create a set timeout here, and I'm going to have a very short timeout, 100 milliseconds. And inside here, I'm going to say image overlay visibility. I'm going to say that it's going to be visible. This is enough for us to just check this out to see what it looks like right now. I'm going to tap on this, and you can see that we have that image overlay show up right there. It's the right size, 200 by 200, but it's in the wrong position. So we need to fix that. how do we get that position to be correct before we start doing the animation here? Well, we need to figure out where the old image is. So we say old image, and we can call this function called get location in window. This will get us a point. So I'm going to say const log point. That's the location of the old image in the window. I'm going to say image overlay dot left equals log point dot x, and this is not going to be right. Image overlay dot top equals log point dot y. This is not right because we have to account for the status bar. So as you can see, we're a little bit off there. We do get that image sort of close to the position where we wanted to start animation from, but it's off a little bit because of the status bar. So let's account for the status bar, and the status bar is actually 20, so we know that. Status bar height, and let's set that to 20. We're also going to need action bar height also, so I'm going to set that here as well. We're going to need that later when we're animating. So action bar height is different on iOS and Android. On iOS, action bar height is 64, and on Android, 68. Now that we have the status bar height, we can say image overlay top equals location point y minus status bar height. And now, if we take a look at this, you'll see that when I tap on this, that image shows up right where the old image was. Even after scrolling a little bit, if I tap on this image, you'll see that that's where the starting point of that image is going to be. Now, we need to animate it from that point to the next point. And the next point is actually going to be the details page. So we need to figure out where on the details page that image is going to be. Let's go to this set timeout callback, and I'm going to start animating our image overlay using just NativeScript animation APIs. I'm going to call the animate function and pass in the animation definition. Here we're going to translate, and I'm going to say x is going to be -1 times location point dot x. We want it to be moving in the direction from the image to the edge of the page, which is going to be moving from right to left. And that's why it's -1 here. And then for the y value, I want to say -1 times location point y plus the action bar height. We want to take that into account as well. Now, in the NativeScript APIs, the new APIs, we can actually animate the width of the image, or of any view really. And the reason we want to do that is because on the details page, the width is the full width of the page. And we know that. So what's the full width of the page? Well, we can get that from screen.mainScreen. Did we not import the right screen here? Let's go up to the top here. I need to import screen. So that's coming from the platform module. That's coming from TNS core modules platform. Now we have the proper screen. Main screen is the property we want. And then width in dips. That's going to be the full width that we're animating to. Okay. And then duration. We need to specify duration. Let's have that be a constant. I'm going to define it at the top here so we can change it around if we need to. I'm going to call it anim duration. Let's say, I don't know, 1000 for now. It shouldn't take that long, but I'll start out that way so we can see it better. So I'm going to set the duration to anim duration. And also I want to specify a curve, which is going to be a new cubic Bezier animation curve, because otherwise it's going to be linear and it's going to look really terrible and boring. So I've already discovered what curve I want to use. That's this right here. And I have other videos on this channel showing how to determine the cubic Bezier animation curve if you check out some of my animation videos here. Let's take a look at what we've done so far. So I'm going to tap on this image right here, and you can see that it animates into the proper spot. It still stays in that spot, so that's not ideal. We'll fix that in a bit. But I'm going to go back to the people page and tap on this dog right here. Let's see what happens there. So there's some oddities going on with the animation. It's working, and it's not working quite like we want it to. So I'm going to tap on this lady. She animates from the top. We need to really fix that up a little bit. And what happens here is that this image overlay, we're animating it, but we're not resetting its translate property. So its translate property is being affected by this animation, but we need to reset it. So right here, I'm going to go to image overlay. I'm going to say translate X to start with. And if it were on iOS, I'm going to say -1 times location point.x. But if we're on Android, it's going to be 0. Also, image overlay translate Y, we're going to set that one to 0. That image stays on the screen even after we've navigated to the details page. We don't want that to happen. So what we want to do is we have this other event when the navigation is done. And what we want to do is set the image's visibility to hidden again when it's done navigating. Let's go ahead and set a timeout here. And this one's going to be animation duration. So we want this to happen after the animation completes. And we want the image detail.source to be set to image overlay.source. So we're kind of passing in that source through this event, through the image overlay to our image detail. Now remember, on the home page, I said we can pass in this image source right here to the details page in the context. You can do that and you can set the image detail when you get it in the context right here. So args.context will have our image source property on it right here. And we can set image detail.source to args.context.image source. Now, while we can do that, I decided not to do it that way. And the reason is I don't want that image on the detail page actually showing up until we fire this event, because I don't want to handle any other timing situations or any other timing problems. So only after navigation is done and we fire this event, that's when I want the detail page image to show up. And that's when we're going to set its source. Okay, so that's what's happening here. And now, after this is done, after we've set the source, I'm going to set another timeout here inside of the timeout handler. Sometimes the way the asynchronous nature of this works is you need to set a bunch of timeouts. And it's not really hacky, it's just how you can work around certain problems in JavaScript, certain UX timing problems. All right, so inside here, I'm going to say image overlay visibility, and I'm going to say hidden. This is hiding that overlay after we've done navigating. All right, so let's try this out. I'm going to tap on this lady right here, and we're going to navigate, and her picture is going to animate to the details page. And then we don't really see the transition between when that overlay image is hidden and when that details page is shown. So that's pretty cool. And that works with any one of these images, and the transition is complete. If I go to one of these other ones here, like this lady right here, you can see that even from the middle of the page and from the bottom of the page, that animation takes place and it works just as we want it to. Just one more tip for those folks that are using Android, and here's Android. With Android, you have these two action bars showing up now because there's a default action bar that shows up without you even specifying it. So on the root page XML, on the page element, you just want to add an attribute that says action bar hidden equals true. And this will hide that first action bar and just have the one we need right there. All right, that was really sweet. Thanks for all of you who asked about this tutorial. I finally created it, got around to it, and thanks for watching it. Now let's read some of your comments from this video I made. Actually, I had a guest on, and it was Dave Coffin. He's a NativeScript expert. I guess I posted the video to YouTube, but he's the one that actually created this. It's called How to Work with Safe Areas in iOS. If you've ever had an issue working with safe areas in iOS and NativeScript, this is the video for you because he goes into the nuts and bolts of how it works. So let's take a look. Not too many comments on that, but I thought I'd read them anyway. Bilal Mohammed says, neat. David Wilson says, pretty sweet. Thanks, Dave. And Renan Evangelista says, muito bom mem. I don't know what that means, but maybe somebody can translate for me. I'm guessing it's something good. That was quick and painless. I will see you all in the next video. Happy native scripting.